Have you ever felt like you're running a race while learning English, but like with a translator glued to your side, constantly having to stop and convert everything back and forth?
Oh, I know that feeling. It's a struggle for sure. That mental back and forth can make fluency feel so far away.
It's like, I know what I want to say, but by the time I translate it in my head, the moment's gone. I bet a lot of our listeners know exactly what I mean.
Absolutely. And it's one of the biggest things to overcome. But what if I told you that there are ways to train your brain to think in English directly, to just skip over that translator completely?
Now, that would be amazing. How do we even start doing that?
Well, one really effective technique is called the word association game. It's pretty simple, but it uses how our brains naturally connect things.
I love a good game. Tell me more.
So it's all about forcing yourself to think in English without using your native language. You pick any word, and then you think of other words that relate to it, but all in English.
So like, if I start with apple, I might think red, and then fruit, then maybe pie, all without translating anything.
Exactly. You're making a chain of association, so you're strengthening those pathways in your brain that are all about English.
But wouldn't I get stuck just thinking about the same few basic words over and over?
Well, that's where the challenge is. You have to push yourself to think of different connections, to really stretch your vocabulary. Instead of just red, maybe think crisp or juicy or even orchard. The goal is to get your mind working quickly in English.
Okay, I see how that would make those connections stronger and faster. So it's more about speed than getting every word right.
Yeah. Don't worry about being perfect. Think of it as a warm-up for your brain, Just getting it ready to think in English, even a few minutes each day helps.
I'm adding this to my routine for sure. Okay, so what else can we do to get rid of that translator in our heads?
Well, this next one uses your senses. It's called visualize, don't translate. Basically, you describe things you see, hear, or even smell directly in English without translating.
Okay, that sounds a little harder. Can you give me an example?
Sure. Let's say you see a really colorful bird outside your window. Instead of thinking in your native language, you go straight to, wow, a bright blue bird. It has a long beak and such a pretty song.
Oh, I get it. So I'm not just saying what it is, I'm really describing it, like I'm painting a picture with words.
Exactly. And the more detail you can give, the better. You're using more vocabulary and engaging with the language more.
This makes me think about how I learn new words in general. I use translation apps sometimes, which can be helpful.
It can become a crutch, right?
Yeah, like I'll know the translation, but I won't really understand the word.
That happens a lot. Translation apps are good sometimes, but they don't help you really learn the language. It's like taking a shortcut instead of building a road.
So what should I do instead? If I don't know a word, I have to look it up somehow.
Of course. But instead of a bilingual dictionary or an app, try using an English dictionary.
Wouldn't that just give me more words? I don't know.
It might feel that way at first, but just trust me. Looking up a word in English shows you synonyms, antonyms, and examples, all in English.
So it's like learning a new word by exploring all around it, instead of just seeing one side.
Yes. You're understanding it more deeply, making connections between words, and staying in that English mindset.
That's a great way to put it. Okay, so we have word association, we have visualization, and we're not using translation apps. What's next?
Well, all of these work even better when you combine them with the best way to learn a language, immersion.
Here we go, everyone's favorite word, immersion. But seriously, what does that actually look like in real life? We can't all move to England.
You're right. Immersion isn't about where you live. It's about making your environment English-speaking. It can be something small, like changing your phone settings to English or reading English news articles.
So even small changes can make a big difference.
Absolutely. Think about how much time you spend on your phone each day. All of that can be a chance to see the language.
That's a good point. I already want to make some changes. What are some other ways to do immersion at home?
How about cooking? Try using recipes in English instead of your native language. You'll learn new food words, plus you'll get a tasty meal out of it.
That's a win-win. And there's so many cooking videos in English too.
Exactly. You can watch and listen and even try to follow the instructions, all while immersing yourself.
It's like learning without even trying.
Exactly. And that's the key. Make immersion fun. The more you use English in your daily life, the easier it will be to think in English.
This is making me rethink how I learn English. It's not all about textbooks and grammar. It's about making my whole world English.
Yes. And the best part is, even if you don't understand everything at first, your brain is still learning. The sounds, the rhythms, all of it. It's like you're learning to swim. At first you're just splashing around. But the more you're in the water, the more natural it feels.
I love that analogy. Okay, so we're learning words. We're surrounding ourselves with English. What about actually speaking? That's the hardest part for me.
It makes sense to feel that way. But here's something that can help you feel more confident and fluent. Talk to yourself.
Wait, really? Like have full conversations with myself?
Yes. It might feel weird at first, but think of it as practice. You can narrate your day. Practice ordering food. anything.
It's like, okay, brain, what are we making for dinner? I'm thinking pasta, but what kind of sauce?
Exactly. You're getting comfortable making sentences and using new words, and there's no pressure because no one's listening.
And I won't be afraid to make mistakes. Plus, I bet I would start to notice my own grammar mistakes more.
You would. It's like having a language teacher in your head. And speaking of brains, did you know that using your imagination can help you think in English too?
Oh, tell me more. I have a really good imagination.
Perfect. Use it to your advantage. Make up scenarios in your mind and play them out in English. Imagine you're giving a presentation, or having a debate, or even just chatting with a friend.
So it's like I'm making my own little movie in my head, but in English.
Exactly. And the more details you add, the more real it feels. It's not just about the words, it's about creating a whole world in English.
This is making me realize that thinking in English is more than just translating. It's a whole different way of thinking.
That's right. It's about changing that voice in your head to English. And that includes how you think about grammar.
Oh, grammar. That makes me think about school and memorizing rules.
I know what you mean. But good news. You don't have to be a grammar expert to think fluently in English. In fact, thinking about grammar too much can actually slow you down.
So it's more important to just get my meaning across than to be perfectly correct.
Yes. Think about how you learned your first language. You didn't start with grammar rules. You started by copying and making mistakes.
Yeah, I learned by listening and trying to say what I heard.
Exactly. And you can do the same thing with English. Listen to how native speakers talk, and your brain will start to learn the patterns.
So I'm learning the grammar naturally instead of forcing it.
Yeah, exactly. Now, this can be hard, especially when you start to have negative thoughts, like, I'll never learn this, or comparing yourself to others.
Those thoughts are the worst. They make me feel so discouraged.
I know, but everyone who learns a language feels that way sometimes. It's normal. The important thing is to not let those thoughts control you.
That's easier said than done. Do you have any tips for dealing with those negative thoughts?
Of course. First, notice those thoughts, but don't focus on them. So instead of, I'm so bad at this, think I'm learning and I'm getting better every day.
So I should focus on what I'm doing well instead of what I'm doing wrong.
Exactly. And celebrate the small things, even if it's just learning a new phrase or understanding a joke in English.
I like that I should be proud of myself for all the work I'm doing.
Yes. Now let's talk about vocabulary, because words are really important in any language.
Sometimes I feel stuck with vocabulary. I know the basics, but how do I keep learning new words without it feeling boring?
Here's an idea. Forget about those long lists of words and focus on words that are important to you. Think about things you like to talk about, things you're passionate about.
So instead of trying to learn every word, I should just learn words that I'll actually use. Like if I like cooking, I should learn cooking words.
Exactly. It makes learning more fun, and you'll remember those words better because they mean something to you.
That makes so much more sense, and I bet there are lots of resources out there for different interests.
Of course. Cookbooks, blogs, YouTube channels, all in English. And when you're using those resources, don't just focus on the definitions. Try to understand the little differences in meaning.
You mean like those small nuances, like happy and joyful? They both mean good feelings, but joyful feels more intense.
Exactly. Understanding those nuances helps you express yourself better in English.
So it's not just about knowing a lot of words, it's about using them the right way.
You got it. And one of the best ways to learn that is through reading.
Ah, reading. That's something I love. But how does reading help me think in English?
When you read, you see a lot of vocabulary being used naturally. You see how words work together in sentences, how they show different tones and emotions.
It's like seeing words in their natural environment instead of just in a dictionary.
Yes. And don't be afraid to read things that are a little challenging for you.
Wouldn't that just be frustrating?
Maybe at first, but trust me, it's worth it. When you see words you don't know, it makes you think harder. Look up those words. Write them down. Try using them yourself.
So it's like a workout for my brain.
Exactly. You're getting stronger, expanding your vocabulary, and getting more comfortable with English.
This is making me realize that thinking in English is like a puzzle. All these different pieces need to fit together.
You're right. It's not just about memorizing words or grammar rules. It's about understanding how they work together to create meaning.
And speaking of putting things together, I've always loved idioms and expressions. They're so creative, but they also feel like a whole other language.
They are. Idioms make English more interesting, but they can be tricky because they don't always mean what the words say.
Like kick the bucket doesn't actually mean kicking a bucket.
Right. Idioms often come from stories or culture, which makes them even more fun to learn.
So it's not just about remembering the phrase, it's about understanding where it comes from.
Exactly. Knowing the story behind an idiom makes it easier to remember and helps you use it correctly.
This reminds me of how much humor uses idioms. I've definitely missed the point of some jokes because I didn't understand the idiom.
That happens to a lot of language learners. Humor is different in every culture, and idioms are a big part of that.
So how can I get better at understanding English humor, especially jokes with wordplay or cultural references?
The best way is to just experience a lot of English humor. Watch stand-up comedy, sitcoms, cartoons. The more you see, the more you'll understand.
So I have to train my sense of humor.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to ask someone to explain a joke. Native speakers are usually happy to help.
This is making me realize that thinking in English isn't just about the language itself. It's about understanding the culture and the people.
You're absolutely right. Language is a part of culture, and the more you understand the culture, the better you'll be at expressing yourself in English.
Speaking of expressing myself, one thing I have trouble with is expressing my emotions in English. I can say basic things, but when it comes to deeper feelings, I don't know the words.
That's very common. It makes sense. Emotions are complicated, and finding the right words can be hard in any language, especially when you're still learning.
So how can I learn more words for emotions in English?
One good way is to just pay attention to how native speakers do it. Watch movies and TV shows, read books, listen to music. Notice the words people use to express happiness, sadness, anger, excitement, all those different feelings.
So I should pay attention to how people use language for emotions.
Exactly, and don't just watch. Try to use those words and phrases yourself. When you're writing or talking to friends, make an effort to use those new words.
It's like I'm learning a whole new way to talk about feelings.
Yes, and the more you practice, the easier it will become.
This is giving me a whole new perspective on thinking in English.
Yeah,
It's not just about the rules, it's about connecting with the feelings and experiences that make us human.
that's a beautiful way to put it. And that human connection is what makes learning a language so special.
Wow. This deep dive has really changed how I think about thinking in English. It's not just about knowing words and grammar.
It really isn't. It's more about changing your whole mindset, embracing the culture and connecting with the emotions of the language.
And we talk about so many different ways to do that, from those word games
Yeah.
to visualizing to just surrounding ourselves with English.
We learned how to break those old translation habits, how to build vocabulary that we're actually interested in, and even how to use our imagination to practice English.
It's like we gave everyone a toolbox full of ways to train their brain to think in English.
And remember, the most important thing is to try things out. Find what works for you and keep changing as you learn. Language learning is different for everyone. There's no one right way.
It's all about being curious and playful and not giving up. And I think one of the most important things we talked about is celebrating those little wins.
Absolutely. It's easy to get caught up in wanting to be fluent right away.
Well,
But it's important to take a moment and recognize how far you've come, even the small things.
like giving yourself a pat on the back and saying, hey, I'm doing this, I'm getting better.
Exactly. Remember that feeling when you understood a joke in English for the first time, or when you had a conversation without translating in your head? Those are big wins.
They really are, because those moments make us feel good and keep us excited about learning.
So as we finish up our deep dive into thinking in English, I want to encourage you to enjoy the process, celebrate your successes, and remember that fluency comes one step at a time.
That's a great way to put it. And for everyone listening, I have one last question. What's one small thing you can do today to get closer to thinking in English?
Maybe you could watch a short video in English, or read a news article, or even just talk to yourself in the shower.
Every little bit helps. So keep practicing, keep learning, and most importantly, keep having fun with the language.
Happy learning, everyone.